Hey, listener, ready to jump into some seriously fascinating biblical mysteries? You know, you sent over those excerpts from Ecos de la Biblia. Well, we're taking those and diving deep into the enigmas that have puzzled scholars for, like, centuries.
It's amazing how these mysteries just pull you in. You know, it's like this basic human need to make sense of the unexplainable, you know, to sort of fill in those gaps in these really powerful stories.
It really is like a treasure hunt, kind of, through history and faith and all that. And we're going to start this journey off with something that sounds like it's straight out of myth, the Behemoth. This thing, this biblical giant, it's described in the book of Job, and let me tell you, it's pretty extraordinary.
Oh, yeah. Think about a creature with a tail like a massive cedar tree and bones like solid bronze. I mean, the book of Job just goes all in on describing its incredible strength. You can just feel the power and resilience, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely a description that sparked a whole lot of debate. What is it about the way the behemoth is described that makes it such a mystery even after all these years? Some people think it's a hippopotamus, others a rhinoceros. Some even say it could be a dinosaur.
I totally get why people try to, like, fit the behemoth into some category we already know, you know, like an animal we can point to. But I think the text is doing something more than just giving us a zoology lesson. The behemoth, to me, is like this symbol of untamed creation, this raw force humans can't even grasp, you know? It reminds us that there are things way bigger than us, like God's power and the fact that we can't understand everything.
So it's not about, like, finding an exact match in the real world, but more about understanding what it represents. Okay, I get that. But let's move from a creature of myth, so to speak, to a place that might have actually existed, the lost city of Ophir.
Oh, Ophir. This legendary place, it pops up in Genesis, Kings, Chronicles. And it was supposed to be unbelievably wealthy, gold, precious stones, rare goods, all of it. A treasure trove that I bet just fired up people's imaginations back then.
And even today, I mean, it just makes you want to go exploring. But if it was so famous, where was it?
That's the million-dollar question. Some theories say it was somewhere on the Arabian Peninsula. You know, that area was known for incense and spices, all that trade. So that would fit with Ophir's reputation for valuable stuff. Then there's Ethiopia. Historically, a huge source of gold, which is another big part of how Ophir is described.
Arabian Peninsula, Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Any other guesses out there?
Oh, yeah. Some say it could be India. Think about all the gems and metals they had. And there's even this really out there theory that links Ophir to the Americas. But that one's based on stuff from way later on.
So Ophir is still this big mystery, lost somewhere between history and legend. Makes you think what else might be out there just waiting to be found, huh?
Absolutely. And it really tells us a lot about how connected the ancient world was. I mean, these trade routes, right? These huge exchanges of goods, ideas, people. They spanned continents. They shaped civilizations. The mystery of Ophir gives us a glimpse into that whole world that's vanished.
Speaking of things lost to time, let's talk about maybe the most famous lost object ever, Noah's Ark. We all know the story, but where did the Ark end up after the flood was over?
Well, Genesis says it landed on the mountains of Ararat. And a lot of folks take that to mean one specific mountain, Mount Ararat, over in eastern Turkey. A pretty striking image, right? This huge peak, like a symbol of the flood's power.
Yeah, when you say Noah's Ark, that's what most people picture, I bet. But you said a lot of folks interpret it that way. Does that mean there are other ways to look at it? Like, are there other places those mountains of Ararat could be?
You bet. That's what makes it a real mystery. Yeah. The wording, mountains of Ararat, could actually mean a whole region. You know, like parts of Turkey, Armenia, maybe even Iran. So while Mount Ararat is a popular theory, it's not the only one by a long shot.
So we're looking at a much bigger area then, huh? Anywhere else that people think the Ark could be?
Oh, there are some theories that put it deeper into Iran or even further away based on different ways of understanding the geography back then and, you know, geological evidence and all that.
So the hunt for Noah's Ark is still on, just like the search for Ophir. Sometimes the journey's as important as the destination, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think you're right. The search for these lost relics, whether it's a physical thing like the Ark or a place like Ophir, it often tells us just as much about ourselves, you know, like our curiosity, our need to make sense of the past, as it does about the things themselves.
It's like putting together this huge historical jigsaw puzzle, one piece at a time. You know what else feels kind of like a puzzle? The lost books of the Bible.
Ah, yeah. We're talking about texts that are mentioned in the Bible, like they're real sources of information, but they're not actually in the Bible we use today. It's like having a library, but some of the books are just gone. Makes you wonder what those missing books would tell us.
It's like a literary ghost story, you know? We hear whispers of these books, but we can't actually read them. What kind of information do you think these books might have contained?
Well, imagine super detailed accounts of events that are just hinted at in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's the Chronicles of Nathan and Gad. They supposedly had a much more complete record of King David's reign. We could learn so much more about him, his decisions, the whole impact he had.
And who knows what else might be in there? Lost prophecies, stories of epic battles, maybe even miracles and teachings that we've never heard before. It's pretty wild to think about all that lost knowledge. Why do you think those books disappeared in the first place?
There are a few possibilities. I mean, ancient manuscripts were really fragile things, right? Some probably just crumbled over time. Others maybe got lost in accidents, wars, natural disasters. And then, of course, there's the whole process of deciding what made it into the Bible and what didn't.
So some texts might have been left out for theological reasons or even political ones. That makes the whole process of, assembling the Bible seem much more human than we might think. But hey, maybe there's still hope, right? Maybe fragments of those lost books are still out there, somewhere in some archive, waiting to be discovered. Or maybe there are clues to what they contained hidden in other ancient writings.
That possibility is what keeps scholars digging and searching, trying to fill in those gaps in our understanding of biblical history and literature. Those lost books represent this whole layer of knowledge that could completely change how we see the Bible and the time it came from.
All right, let's switch gears a bit and tackle a different kind of biblical mystery. This time, we're dealing with figures wrapped up in symbolism and prophecy. Gog and Magog. Those names, they always make me think of, like some huge threat looming, like civilizations clashing on a massive scale.
That's a great way to put it. Gog and Magog. They show up in both the Old and New Testaments, and their roles are definitely all about that apocalyptic vibe.
Yeah.
In Ezekiel, Gog is this prince, right, from the land of Magog, and he leads this massive army against Israel, like at the end of the world.
And then, bam, they pop up again in Revelation. Only this time, they're on Satan's side in the final battle. It's like they represent, the ultimate bad guys, pure chaos against everything God's trying to do. But are they meant to be taken literally? Are we talking about real historical figures, or is it more symbolic?
That's the question that keeps scholars up at night. Some think Gog and Magog refer to specific groups from history, like maybe the Scythians, those fierce warriors, or the Goths who had a hand in the fall of Rome. Those interpretations would make the prophecy tied to actual historical events.
So maybe they were real threats that people back then used to represent, like a bigger sense of doom, like something terrible was coming.
Yeah, exactly. But there are others who see Gog and Magog as just symbols. They represent evil forces in general, any enemy of God's people, no matter when they lived. That way of looking at it makes the prophecy more flexible, like it applies to different times and situations.
Which is interesting because people have been applying that Gog and Magog prophecy to things happening right now for centuries.
It shows you how powerful those figures are, how they still connect with people's fears about the future. It seems like every generation finds a way to link Gog and Magog to whatever they're most afraid of.
Yeah, they're this blank canvas and we can project our own anxieties onto them. From ancient empires to modern day stuff, Gog and Magog seem to stand for whatever scares us the most. Now, speaking of anxieties, let's shift to a mystery that hits a little closer to home. The lost years of Jesus. We have accounts of his childhood and then, boom, his public ministry. But in between, nothing. Almost 20 years, and the Gospels are silent.
It's weird, right? Those missing years from when he was about 12 to 30 have led to so many theories. The most basic one is that Jesus just lived a regular life in Nazareth, working as a carpenter with Joseph.
That makes sense. It's simple, and it kind of fits with the whole idea of Jesus understanding what regular people go through. But it also feels kind of, underwhelming. I mean, considering how extraordinary his life became. Some people say he might have traveled, to Egypt, Persia, even India. Maybe he was learning about different spiritual traditions. Others think he might have spent time with Jewish monastic communities, like the Essenes, to deepen his understanding.
Those theories are cool because they say, hey, maybe those lost years were actually super important for Jesus. Maybe that's where he really grew and learned. It's fun to imagine him in different cultures, encountering different philosophies, different ways of thinking about God.
It's like those missing years hold the secret to understanding his teachings and his whole mission, right? Does it bug you as a scholar that we just don't know what happened? Or is it better to just use our imaginations?
There's something good about both sides, I think. The historian in me, of course, would love to have more facts,
Yeah.
hard evidence. But the spiritual part of me, it kind of likes the mystery. We get to think about what those experiences might have been, how they shaped the person who would go on to change, well, everything.
It's a good reminder that even the most famous, most influential figures had their own journeys, right? Things that made them who they were. Okay, let's switch gears again to something a bit more philosophical this time. The name of God. It's this core idea in so many religions, but the way God is named and addressed is totally different in each one.
Yeah, it really shows you how diverse human spirituality is. In Judaism, the holiest name for God is this thing called the Tetragrammaton. It's 4 Hebrew letters, YHWH. But it's considered so holy that you're not supposed to say it out loud. Instead, they use the word Adonai, which means Lord.
It's interesting how even naming God is treated with so much respect and care.
Right. It's like the idea is that God's true nature is just beyond us. You know, we can't understand it, can't even put a name to it.
Then you have Christianity, where Lord is a common way to refer to God. It's got this sense of both power and closeness.
Yeah. And of course, in Christianity, the name Jesus becomes central. It represents the belief that God actually became human.
And then there's Islam, where Allah is the one and only name for God. It emphasizes his unity and absolute power over everything.
Allah in Islam represents the purest form of believing in one God, a strong reminder that there's only one God and everything was created by him.
It's amazing how these different names show us the specific beliefs and culture of each faith, right? Each one trying to explain their understanding of God in their own way.
It's like looking through a kaleidoscope, you know? Each little piece shows a different part of the same light.
Now, let's go from the vastness of God to something very specific. The year of Jesus' birth. We all celebrate Christmas, but pinning down the actual year Jesus was born, way more complicated than you might think.
It's a mystery that brings faith and history together. And it shows how hard it can be to make sense of ancient texts using what we know today. The Gospel of Luke ties Jesus' birth to a census that Caesar Augustus ordered during the time when Herod the Great was king.
Okay, so that gives us a starting point, historically. But I've heard there's some stuff that doesn't quite add up, like the details about the census and when Herod was in charge. What are the biggest challenges to figuring out the exact year?
The biggest one is that calendars back then weren't like ours. The Jewish calendar, the Roman calendar, the one we use now, they're all different.
So it's like a big calendar puzzle.
Exactly. And we don't have a lot of detailed records from back then. It's like trying to put together a puzzle, but some of the pieces are missing.
So what do scholars do? Have they been able to at least get close?
Yeah, looking at the evidence we have, most scholars put Jesus' birth somewhere between 6 and 4 BC. That's a bit earlier than the traditional Christmas date.
So we might be celebrating Christmas a little late, but not by much.
Right. And while we might never know the exact year, the real point of Jesus' birth goes beyond a date on a calendar, right? It's the idea behind it, God becoming human. That's what matters.
All right, let's go from a birth to a much heavier event, the place of Jesus' crucifixion. We know it was on a hill called Golgotha, which means skull in Aramaic, but exactly where in Jerusalem that was, still a mystery.
Yeah, the Gospels themselves just give us hints, not a map. And Jerusalem has changed so much over time, it's super hard to pinpoint the exact spot.
The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, that's probably the most famous site connected to the crucifixion, right? It's incredibly important to Christians all over the world. But is there any real proof that it's the actual place?
Well, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built on a spot that people have believed was the place of Jesus' crucifixion and burial since at least the 4th century. So tons of tradition backing it up, but hard archaeological evidence, that's still missing. Then there's the Garden Tomb outside the old city walls. A lot of people call that Mount Calvary.
So we've got two main contenders, each with its own arguments and traditions. Are scholars looking at any other possible locations?
Oh, yeah. Archaeologists and historians are still looking at other spots, both inside and outside the old city. Jerusalem's landscape has changed drastically, so the Golgotha we see today might be completely different from the one in Jesus' time.
It just goes to show you how much history is still unknown, right? But even if we never find the exact spot, Golgotha represents something really powerful. The suffering, the sacrifice, and the hope for redemption. That's at the core of what Christians believe. All right, listener, buckle up for our last mystery. This one takes us into some spooky territory, where faith and fear kind of get mixed up. We're talking about the Witch of Endor. Intriguing figure, but kind of creepy too.
Yeah, the Witch of Endor shows up in the first book of Samuel. And her story always gets people talking, that's for sure. So King Saul, he's about to go into this huge battle, right, against the Philistines. And he's desperate, so he goes to her, hoping she can contact the spirit of the prophet Samuel, who's already dead.
It's kind of wild that Saul, who'd basically banned all that medium and necromancer stuff, he turns to one when he's really scared and needs advice. Shows you how powerful fear can be, you know? It can make you do things you wouldn't normally do. And the crazy part is, the Witch of Endor, she actually seems to pull it off. She summons Samuel's spirit. Makes you wonder, right? About prophecy, about the spirit world, about how much control we really have.
It definitely messes with your head a little bit. Good and evil, the line between the living and the dead, how God communicates with us. It's all there in this story. And it shows us that the Bible isn't afraid to get into some seriously complex stuff.
It's definitely a story that sticks with you. And it leaves us with more questions than answers, honestly. Is the Witch of Endor a bad guy, a good guy, somewhere in between? What does it say about Saul that he went to her for help? And what about Samuel's message from beyond the grave? What are we supposed to make of that?
Those questions have been keeping theologians and scholars busy for, forever. And I think that's part of why we love these biblical mysteries. They force us to really engage with the text, to think hard about what it all means and what it has to do with our own lives.
Well, listener, we've gone through a whole bunch of biblical mysteries today. Mythical creatures, lost cities, mysterious figures. We've talked about God, about Jesus, about how these ancient stories still have power.
What I find so amazing is how these mysteries, after all this time, after all the debates, they still grab our attention. They remind us that even in the most familiar stories, there are things we don't know, questions that haven't been answered. And that should make us curious, make us think.
And isn't it cool how these ancient stories still resonate with us today? They connect to something deep inside us, our need to find meaning, to connect with something bigger than ourselves, to make sense of the world and where we fit in.
Yeah, they also remind us that faith and understanding, it's a journey. There's always more to discover, to learn, to think about.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I hope you're leaving with a sense of wonder and that you want to keep exploring. Don't be afraid to ask questions, Challenge what you think you know. Look for new ways of seeing things.
The Bible, with all its mysteries and everything, it's just endlessly fascinating.
And who knows, maybe you'll uncover some mysteries of your own along the way. Thanks for joining us on this adventure, and until next time, keep exploring.